there have been all of these moments where I had questions or I didn't know what was going on in my life, but peace was there all along. And that wasn't something that I could just intellectually understand and make sense of in that moment. It has to be bigger than that.
Morgan, MHN in the house. This is the third time, I think, we're having you back on the show, and I'm just so excited to get to hang out with you. And I just feel like every time I spend time with you, I leave not ironically at all. This is so appropriate, but just I feel like I have such a peace about me. And you have a brand new book coming out called Peace is a Practice that we're going to talk about a ton. So first of all, just welcome.
Oh, well, thank you for having me again. It's such a joy to talk to you, and I've been looking forward to this. So thank you so much.
Yeah. So I feel like, the subtitle of the book is an invitation to breathe deep and find a new rhythm for life. And I feel like after the last 2 years, I'm going to say all of us, we'll say at least most of us, the vast majority of us are ready for some new rhythms. And specifically, we're ready to say, this does not get to come with me. Out of this last 2 years, this has to stay there. This can't be part of the rhythm anymore. It just doesn't matter. It's not what lasts. It's not what I want to hold on to. So for you in the last 2 years, what is something you've realized in this new rhythm of life, heading into a brand new year? What doesn't get to come with me that was part of my life before the pandemic in the last 2 years?
I love that question. Just to be totally transparent, the busyness, the forced busyness, the pressured, even a lot of times conditioned busyness of you must be doing things every day, all day. Just before this conversation, I was looking at my calendar and I found a day coming up where there was nothing on the calendar. And the calendar app that I use, it said, "There's nothing on the calendar. Would you like to add something? Click here to create."
Oh, wow.
And I just thought about how interesting that is. That there's so many little subtle things that just prompt us there should be something here. I should have more going on. I can't have gaps in the schedule. I can't have room to breathe, and just how dangerous that is. So for me, I feel like what I've left behind and what I'm continuing, it's like you would think, after a couple of years of being into this that I would get that, but I don't. It's still something that I have to constantly look at. Say, I'm not bringing that forced busyness, that constant pressure with me. I am going to continue to learn how to let that go.
Yeah. Oh man, I love that, and I feel like it just that hit a nerve when you were talking about all the little things that conspire to tell us we're wrong if we rest. Like, what do you mean you're not going to put something on this day? What do you mean you're not going to add something to the calendar? What do you mean you're not going to do 7 different social medias and, be on Instagram enough that it doesn't punish you with the algorithm or whatever? It's I don't know about you, but it's a little terrifying to me, the way that we're headed, where it is just bit by bit, we are losing our humanity to a certain extent, right? We're becoming kind of like these plugged in matrix machines who get rewarded for checking out a real life. And that's, I don't know. I think it's like you really have to be awake and you really have to be brave to a certain extent to be that countercultural and say, maybe I won't be able to win on Instagram, but I'll have my life. Anyway,
exactly.
that was a bit of a tangent, but man, that just made me feel some things.
That needed to be said. It needs to be said. It needs to be on a big billboard everywhere because that pressure is so real. It doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter how far you are into your profession. If you use social media for personal reasons, for professional, it doesn't matter. We're all impacted by it. It's like, even if you're the kind of person who's like, I am deleting every single social media platform that ever exists. People are still going to ask you all the time, did you see this? Did you see that? Like,
Yeah.
whoa, oh, you don't have this? What? So it's permeated our lives. So
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, I think we need to talk about it way more, because
Yeah.
it's kind of turning into, it keeps growing and growing, and the expectations around it keep growing and growing. So
Yeah.
yeah.
You know, right in between the break, right before this, we were recording another episode and we had a break, and Justin was showing me this video that's making the rounds on Facebook right now. And it's of an art installation of like a robot kind of crane machine that's in like a gallery where people could come watch it. And the machine has been programmed or created to leak hydraulic fluid, which they actually color to look red, to look like blood. And in the beginning, the machine is programmed to do like a happy dance for all the spectators when it has like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
it's just lost a little bit of that fluid. And it's like programmed
Mm.
to like try to sweep up the fluid and bring it back in. But as it goes on and it's losing more and more and more and more of its fluid, you actually watch this machine work itself to death,
Wow.
perform itself to death.
Mm.
And it's just, I mean, it's an art piece. It's a robot. It's not a sentient being, but you feel that on a deep level because we're all kinds of, all of us are losing parts of ourselves in this effort to dance for other people. And man, I don't know, that just hit me really
Oh,
hard.
that,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm really intrigued by that.
Yeah.
It's so interesting that you brought that up, because just, I want to say yes, 2 days ago, actually, my husband and I were just sitting down and we are just kind of planning out like the year and just what we want to do, what we don't want to do anymore.
Yeah.
And I got to a point where I was just kind of describing some things that I felt like I had to do. And a lot of it had to do with social media, actually, but it's not limited to that, but
Yeah.
just things that I felt like I had to do. And I was like, this is how I feel. And I was like, oh, and I got so upset. I was like, I can't even find the words for it. So what I did, I actually drew like a little stick figure version of myself on a piece of paper to show him.
Yeah.
And I said, this is what I feel like. And I did it digitally. And what I know how to do with like making art on my iPad is I selected like a part of like what would be my shoulder. And I'm like, I feel like when I'm doing X, like I'll give you an example, like a bunch of live streams or something, I feel like it's taking a part of me. And when I do this, I feel like it's taking a part of me. And I just
Yeah.
kept doing that. And I was like, to the point that I'm fragmented, like, and I'm not feeling whole. So
Yeah.
that, what you described, I was like, oh my gosh, I kind
Yeah.
of relate to this
Yeah.
robot here. And
Yeah.
and I think that's something I
Yeah.
like, yeah, I definitely have to stay aware of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk about in the book, you talk about how for you, when you picture peace, you picture it like a river. And part of that comes from the song It Is Well With My Soul, when peace like a river attendeth my way. Um, I have actually often thought of peace being like one of these like big trees, like an oak of righteousness, who is
Mm,
content to grow on its own timeline, who's not in a hurry, who's not in a rush. It knows that what it was created for is going to take more time to get there than, say, a weed popping up overnight. And what I think is really interesting is one of my favorite scriptures is from Jeremiah, and it actually brings the two together. It's Jeremiah 17:8, and it says, they will be like a tree planted by the water that sends out its roots by the stream. It does not fear when heat comes. Its leaves are always green. It has no worries in a year of drought and never fails to bear fruit. And just kind of this
mm.
idea of like the roots going into this just perpetual life force that we don't have to
Yes.
force and we don't have to strive for and we don't have to create on our own. We're just planted. So, talk to me a little bit when you think of the river and you think of peace in that form. Like, just describe for a little bit what that feels like to you.
Yes. I love how you said that, and how for this image of this tree and being
Mm,
connected to the river, that just really excited me.
yeah.
Um, what I find to be so true in my life when it comes to peace is that peace is hard to find.
Mm,
It's like, and it often feels further away from where I want it to be. Even if I wake up and I'm having an okay day or a great day, at least one of my neighbors is not.
Yeah.
At least someone in my life, someone in my contact list in my phone is having the opposite kind of day of the way I'm having. And what I found is that I have been desperate for peace, not only for myself, but for other people in my life, for other
Yeah.
people in the world who I don't even know. And I see them struggling and suffering. So it's more complex than just like, oh, well, my peace and feeling good about what the peace. I'm like, it's bigger than that. I'm like, I want peace for everybody, for my family members, for my next door neighbors, for the people that I don't even know and I read about. I'm like, I want peace for us all. And what that sort of cry, that prayer has led me to is really just seeing that peace is something that I have to keep, I have to practice going out and looking for.
Yeah.
And the image of a river is that it is very similar to that feeling of like, when I look out my window, I don't see a river. If I want to go see a river, I've got to go really look for one. I got to take time learning the landscape and the terrain to go and find that river. Even if you want to get like really modern and technical about it, I've done this before because I love rivers where you look on Google Maps and you try to look at the terrain and you try to find a river. Sometimes it's just like a dried out stream, but they still drew it on the map. And you're like, oh, I thought we were coming up on this river and it's not even a river anymore. So it's like, think about it. When's the last time you've seen a river? When's the last time you have observed a river and been able to just sit by that river and take a deep breath? They're hard to find. And at the same time, they're still there. And what I think that what makes it hard for us to find is the wilderness of our own life, the wilderness of everything that we're experiencing. And we have to just keep traveling through that wilderness to seek out that river.
Yeah.
So that's why I just love that image of the river, because it's such a reminder that, you know, it's and it's different than other water courses, say like an ocean. It's like, we know where the oceans are. I'm like, no matter where you live, like, you know how far away you are from the ocean.
Yeah.
And the same with a lake. Like, you can look at a map and like, oh yeah, there's a lake. But a river is a water course that's a bit harder to find. It takes more time. It takes more practice. So that's kind of how I came to that image, and it stayed with me, and it really inspired this book.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's important that one of the things you really focus on is like peace is not the absence of problems. It's not you get to peace when you get your whole life in order and then everything's amazing. And there's like this picture that you paint of this river flowing through a desert, that even when you are in this vast dry bones, desolate land, that peace, that river can still flow. And something I would love to kind of like drill down even a little bit more is when you think about being in circumstances like that, when life is really hard and it's ongoing and it's not lifting and it's not getting solved and prayers aren't getting answered right away. When you say that you have peace even in circumstances like that, I want you to kind of like fill in this blank. Like, I'm assuming based on our previous conversations that part of your peace or all of your peace comes from God. But I wanted to kind of even go like even a little more specific. Like, is it my peace comes from God because I know I'm going to end up in heaven, so this is just a blip? Or is it my peace comes from God because I believe he's going to deliver me from these circumstances? Or my peace comes from God because I have him and that's all I need? Like, what is the rest for people who are like, either they don't know God, they don't have him in their life, or they have been, exploring faith and religion, but they haven't gotten to experience that peace that surpasses all understanding. When you fill in the rest of that sentence, like why does knowing God give you that kind of peace? What is that like rest of the sentence?
Yeah. For me, I don't think there's any coincidence that we as humans are able to remember the past, whether that's 5 minutes ago, 5 years ago, 20 years ago. I don't think it's any coincidence. And one thing that I feel like this is an area of my life where God is used to speak to me in a lot of ways is by looking back And I think that is what helps us see that, oh, wow, there have been all of these moments where I had questions or I didn't know what was going on in my life, but peace was there all along. And that wasn't something that I could just intellectually understand and make sense of in that moment. It has to be bigger than that because I still look back on it. I can't quite, I'm like, I don't know I can't give you a bullet point list of how I made it through that, but I know I did.
Yeah.
And to me, that's God. It's like when it gets past that point of like, I literally don't even know how I got through that. I don't even know how I did that. I don't even know how I made it through that. How did I make it through that? How did we make it through that?
Yeah.
That's, I'm like, that's God, because what God creates and what God shows us in our lives is beyond our human understanding.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was a little kid, my dad asked me, he just likes to he asks us just these kinds of questions, which I loved. And he's like, how do you know when God speaks to you? He asked me this when I was like 5 years old. And I was like, when I think a thought that is bigger than something I can understand.
Yeah.
It's like when I think a thought that was too smart for me to understand, like, oh, that was beyond my kind of realm of understanding. Oh, that must be God.
Yeah.
And that was my answer then, and it's still my answer now. So, I think as humans, it's kind of our natural tendency to look for proof and to look for patterns. And it's like, even in, scripture, you see that with like the disciples, like asking Jesus, like, well, what about this? What about that? Like, and just trying to put the pieces together, the Pharisees are like, well, what about like, you see that there, because that's what humans do. Like, we're just trying to put it together. Like, who is this guy? Like, with all this peace, like, surely there's some catch. Like, come on, you can't just like love people unconditionally. It's like, come on, man. Like, no, there's got to be something here. And I think we do that because we're human and we're naturally trying to kind of lift up the rock, and we're curious. We're trying to lift up the rock and find the roly-polies beneath the rock. And for me, what I have found is that oftentimes when I can look back on my life and see, oh, God was there. It was in those moments where I really can't even explain to you in explicit detail how I made it through that.
Yeah.
It's like, I can give you some clues. So that's something I would like to encourage people to do on a practical level. It's just that, even if you don't have to remember every single detail about your life, but if there's anything about your life that you remember you overcame, just think about that through the lens of like, maybe there's a reason why I can't remember every single detail about how I made it through. Maybe there's something bigger there.
Wow. That is so powerful. And as you were talking, it was reminding me of something that I think is true of my, 7th or 8th grade, like West Virginia history class or whatever is correct. I grew up in West Virginia, and the river there is the New River, but it's actually ironically one of the oldest rivers in the country and one of the few in the world that flow north. And you describing, look at this track record, look at this history, look at all of these things that came before you, all these things that came before you even thought of that had to line up for you to be in this moment right here. These things that don't make any kind of sense, that seem upside down and backwards and beyond understanding. And for you to put that in terms of a river, which has been here for thousands and thousands of years, and something like the New River that defies logic and flows the wrong way. There's something really beautiful about that, assuming that that's all true from my West Virginia class that we took. I'm pretty sure it is.
I love that. Yes, I love that. It's, even, and it's, it's even to me, I find that like I was, obviously we can see each other while we're talking. Like I was just even like just observing you, reflecting on that as you were talking about it, and kind of almost like reaching up as you were talking about it. And I thought even that is so interesting. And that's something that I kind of borrowed from my therapist who pointed that out to me once. I know I can't unsee it when other people are doing it. She's like, when you're telling stories, like there's different, we point in different directions. Like we look in different places. I was like, even that, like, again, maybe I don't know, but I'm like, I just don't feel like that's such coincidence. Like,
Yes.
I feel like God has given us like so many different windows and lenses to say, like, look, come and see like what you've been a part of all along. Like, look back, reflect, think about those moments you had as a child when you were in nature, even if it was brief, because you lived in a city where there are barely any trees, but you remember that one day that you got to just go out into the wild. It's like that stuff is not there by accident.
Yeah.
Those are all invitations for us to reflect and see all along. Our
That's
name has
good.
been called all along. We've been called to this journey of peace.
That is so good. Ooh, that is so good. I'm gonna write that one right down right there. Talk a little bit. I think this is so powerful, and it's not something that I had thought about because we live in Connecticut. We live by the sea. We live by the Long Island Sound. We go out to Rhode Island to the ocean. And you talk in the book that peace is like a river, but peace is not like a sea to you. So talk to the people listening about why that is.
Yeah, so it's probably no secret at this point that I love nature and I reflect on it a lot.
Yeah.
And I associate different memories, even like that I've had in certain moments in nature. And I remember when I was a kid learning about the slave trade and the slave trade in the US. That's where how my ancestors came to the US. And I remember as a young kid, and from this moment forward, I couldn't, particularly the Atlantic Ocean, I could not look at the Atlantic Ocean without thinking and even visualizing those slave ships coming toward the shore.
Yeah.
And for a long time, that really troubled me because it felt like, oh, I can't even just enjoy a day at the beach. Like, I'm not trying to think about this. Even though I'm somebody who loves to like think deeply and I write poetry, I'm not like trying to be that way all the time.
Yeah.
Like sometimes I'm just like trying to just enjoy the beach. And I'm like, wow, why can't I just like get this out of my mind? And it was one day I realized, I was like, wait a second, maybe that's okay. Maybe I need to lean into that more. And maybe instead of trying to talk myself out of thinking about it, I'm like, maybe let me let myself be curious about that. And I started thinking about it even deeper. I'm like, what would happen if I just sat here and I thought about, if I trace all the way back to my ancestor that was laid down flat on a ship, shackled. And if I trace all the way back to that ancestor of mine and think about how they would have thought of me looking on that same sea, I kind of think they would be glad to know that I was here and I was breathing.
Yeah.
And that I was taking a moment to seek out peace amidst everything that happened. And in a weird way, the song It Is Well With My Soul kind of really helped me get there. And that is because of the story of that song, Horatio Spafford, who wrote the song after his 4 daughters had died in a shipwreck on the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah.
And he wrote that song on the way to going to go reunite with his wife, who had also lost her daughters at sea. And I'm like, that's one of the greatest tragedies that anyone could know, losing 4 of your kids in a shipwreck. And those troubled waters that he was traversing through, he sat down and penned the words, "When peace like a river."
Yeah.
It's like he found peace on that river, even though at the same time that river held the truth of of probably the greatest loss of his life. And at the same time, there's someone practicing in that moment, seeking peace in that moment. So for me, I just found a lot of peace in that. I'm like, yeah, there's going to be places that we travel through that don't spark positive memories. There's going to be roads we drive down, cities we visit, names we hear that don't make us just feel good inside. They do the opposite.
Yeah.
And at the same time, there's still room to breathe through those moments.
Yeah. That is so good. It kind of reminds me of that book. Oh, I'm kind of blanking on the name a little bit, but it's something about the body remembers or the body knows.
Oh, yeah. The body keeps score. Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of that, right? Like there are going to be days, and you can't even consciously know why, where you're going to feel grief. You're going to feel it in parts of your body. You're going to feel it in certain places. And, kind of like this generational grief that we carry. You specifically can trace back your lineage to a great-great-grandfather who was born a slave and died free. And you have a line that says, sometimes the act of making art itself is a rebellion against a lack of empathy. And in this particular case, you were talking about you now being a writer and a poet in your generational tree as a rebellion against things like anti-literacy laws, which I just think is such a powerful thing to think through. I have thought about the power of storytelling as it's been passed down in Appalachia, but to actually think me showing up despite my circumstances, me showing up despite what my family has been through, you showing up despite what generations of your family have been through, and creating beauty in a world that feels especially broken. That in itself being an act of rebellion, that is such a powerful call to action of not only can you find peace in the desert, but you can make art in the middle of it. That's so beautiful and powerful. And so I just generally speaking want you to just riff on that for a while, and I just want to sit here and soak it in.
I find so much peace and just the weight off my shoulders whenever I just allow myself to slow down long enough and really think about the sheer volume first of people who had to survive in order for me just to be here.
Yeah.
And then when I think about how, for me, not that long ago, those people were not allowed to learn how to read, not allowed to vote, not allowed to buy property, not allowed to do so many things that I can do today. And yes, there's still room for growth. And at the same time, it's so for me to even know how to read is a miracle all on its own.
Yeah.
That is a miracle all on its own. And I've tried to make it a practice in my own life where I thank God for that. Like when I've had moments where I have a young son and I'm reading to him, and I'll have moments where I just kind of zoom out and I'm like, thank you, God, for allowing me to be here to teach another generation how to read.
Yeah.
How to learn about the world around him, how to cultivate a sense of curiosity. That's a real privilege.
Yeah.
Something that just a few generations ago, my grandfather, who had to drop out of school in 4th grade to take care of his family, that it wasn't even that, that this is all new, and that is worth being grateful for and celebrating and saying thank you for.
Yeah.
So, I try not to be hard on myself in my life, but that's something I'm very hard on myself about, of Morgan, don't you dare forget. Don't you dare forget how much it took for you to just be here breathing right now.
Yeah. I love that. I want to read a line you have. You say, as the song suggests, and you're talking here about the song Deep River, the word peace in that line, the promised land where all is peace, ? Peace still exists within the question mark, not on the other side. Questions about justice, safety, healing, hope, questions that make us wonder, will we ever be truly free? And I like this idea. I like this idea a lot of art being an act of rebellion in the absence of empathy. And on the flip side of that, you say that empathy is being seen. It's making somebody feel seen. So in this moment, what would you want to share about that question mark, getting to the other side of the question mark? What do you think that's going to take?
I think it takes vulnerability and it takes more people sharing their stories. And I recognize that those are incredibly words that get used a whole lot, and it can lead to, well, what does that look like practically in the present moment? What does it practically look like, when my racist neighbor is just going on and on and on. Like, I don't exactly feel like going out on the lawn and just being vulnerable with
Right.
them. It's like, what does that look like practically, Morgan? And these are questions that I, ask myself. Like, I make up these examples in my head, and I'm like, okay, it needs to, what would happen in this scenario?
Yeah.
And one thing that I keep coming back to, and it's like, it's not the answer, but it's an answer that I can offer because I've seen this example in my life. And that is the importance of creativity and artwork. Artwork is a powerful bridge from that place of like, what are we doing? Why are we all struggling so much? Why is everyone yelling at each other? To, okay, we can actually have a conversation.
Yeah.
It's like you can take, and by artwork, I don't just mean canvases on the wall. I mean music. I mean people who bring artistry to the meals that they prepare and share with others. I mean people who say, well, I have an idea. I mean all forms of creativity.
Yeah.
And again, that's not the answer. But I do, as someone who has shared the past few years, sharing tons of art and poetry with the world, and has literally in like the span of sometimes 20 seconds received messages from people who I read them back to back, and I'm like, whoa, these people in real life might disagree on probably everything.
Yeah.
And yet they found something in this poem and they both connected with it.
Wow.
And I'm just like, again, I'm like, I don't believe in coincidence. I'm like, there is something to that. I'm like, God allowed me to be a witness to that for a reason. And I'm like, it's not just on people like me who have an Instagram account or, with who can paint, make artwork and things like that. It's on all of us to figure out, like, how can we on a regular basis create opportunities for people to enter into, to share their experiences. And I've just found that to be true in my life over and over again. And if you read a lot about a lot of different artists in different fields and authors of just like how by putting that book out there, by putting their words out there, by putting their story, their artwork, their song out there, it ended up leading to all these other experiences of other people feeling that permission to open up and share their story.
Yeah.
And I'm just really passionate about, like one example I would give that I had happen not too long ago, where I'll like go through Instagram DMs, and they're kind of hard to keep up with these days, but I do try to like go through every now and then and try to engage as much as I can. And you know how when you go or in your inbox, you can see like people's profile pictures, like as you are scrolling through.
Yeah.
Well, one of the pictures I saw, and I just saw the image, and it was like a white guy. He had on sunglasses and he was like sitting in his car and he just looked really serious. And I'm just like, I don't know. I just don't feel like I was just kind of shocked to see. I'm like, what is he going to say?
Right.
Just to be honest, like I've had some racist experiences on the internet, people who just come for me for no reason whatsoever and just say all kinds of things.
Wow.
And I was preparing myself for that moment. And then I opened it and he was just expressing gratitude for my work. And he was like, my daughter loves what you do. And I just want to be able to support what you do. And he's like, I don't even use Instagram that much, but I just wanted to come here and say thank you. And I was like, wow, the power of art and creativity. I was like, you and I probably will never cross paths in real life. Like we live different lives. Like we don't know each other. I even, just because of my own racial traumatic experiences, I even kind of like jumped. I'm like, oh my gosh, what's this guy in my inbox going to say? And all of that, amidst all of that, there was common ground. Amidst all of that, there was a moment where I was free to exhale and say, okay, like there's something here. So that's what I love about art. And, for those who may hear me say that, who are creative, I think that's probably like exciting. But then I think there's other people who are like, I'm not creative. I'm not an artist. And I'm just going to be real with y'all. y'all are some of the best artists. Like I have plenty of people in my life who are like, I'm not creative. And the second we sit down to do a collage or something, y'all have the best ones. So
Nice.
everybody is creative in their own right. And we all have a way that we can enter into that.
Yeah. You know what I love is when you were talking, it reminded me of there's downtown in New Haven, there's the British Museum of Yale or the British Museum of Art at Yale or something like that. And when you first enter into that building and you begin to go through the exhibits, there's a big quote above your head that says, "One generation studies war so that the next generation may study politics, so that hopefully one day their children may be able to study art." And it's just this idea of like the higher expressions of a country, a society, a people, ourselves, when we can go from studying war to studying art. So I love that. I love that so much.
Wow.
Let's talk a little bit about this idea of being gentle with ourselves. And you tell a story in the book where you are a teenager, you're working in a PacSun, I think it was, and one of your jobs was to fold the shirts, and a dad comes in and he had looked through some shirts and he does the folding himself. And tell us, first of all, just tell us a little bit about that interaction and why you kept thinking about that interaction.
Yeah. So years ago, my first job, I was working in the mall, and I had this family came in and they were just looking at things in the store. And then they were like kind of folding up. They were looking at some shirts, and the dad goes to me, the sales associate. He said, "Oh, look, like I folded the shirts back. I put it back in order. And then I said to him, I was like, "Wow, we did a good job." Like, and he kind of like just gave me like a weird look, and they were all kind of like, okay. And they walked away. And later on, I realized I was like, oh my gosh, he thought I was being sarcastic. And I felt terrible. I was not being sarcastic. I really did think he did a good job. And what that kind of ended up creating for me was a bit of insecurity and even shame around my speaking voice, because it made me think, I'm like, have I been out here in the world communicating with people and speaking to people, and I've been misunderstood in subtle ways that I didn't even know? And I was like, what if these people are, after they leave my presence, are talking about me and how horrible I am and how rude I was? And these are all thoughts that I just started to just compound and just carry with me so much, to the point that when I speak, I am very aware of my inflection, my intonation, where I put the pauses, where I nod my head, how I lift my eyebrows, where I smile, not smile too much. I'm very conscious of all of those things. And I ended up being diagnosed with autism as a 31-year-old, and that actually kind of explains some of the way that I speak, and that helped a lot. But even more than that, what helped a lot is when I started to read my first audiobook, and when I started my podcast, and when I started making like Instagram videos where I was like reading a poem and there was poetry and there was artwork and things, people were telling me, Morgan, your voice is so calming. Your voice is so peaceful. And I was like, isn't that interesting? I was like, I spent all that time seeing my natural monotone voice as a weakness, something I needed to change about myself, something that was wrong, something that was bad, when all along there was this other side of it that other people saw beauty in. And I was just so grateful to have that discovery, because it gave me permission to take some of that pressure off of myself, of needing to be this perfect public speaker or just human being out in the world who always communicates perfectly, exactly the way that I think I should all the time, and say, hey, you know what? All of that kind of stressed you out in that time, there's this other side of it. So that's something that I just really wanted to write about, because I'm like, I know I'm not the only person who has developed a hyper awareness around who you are as a person, maybe even just your physical body and who you are, and how I want everyone to have that experience of recognizing, oh, there's this other side of it. It's like maybe to some people in some moments, I was too much, but maybe in other moments, that too much is actually me pouring from my overflow
Yeah.
to bless someone else.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what I'm just like, man, I just want everyone to have that experience.
Yeah, I love that. This morning, actually, I did a post on Instagram. I woke up and I had one of those moments talking about what you were saying of like, this is not coincidence. And this was a thought higher than yourself. I was like, what do I feel like writing about? Like, oh my gosh, you got to get on post on Instagram. It's like you're dreading it. It's a to do. And I was like, okay, God, what do you have for me? What do you want me to say? And it like, boom, instantly downloaded. And like that doesn't always happen, but man, it was what I needed to hear today. And like a lot of people have said like, yes, like this was for me. And it's the enemy will try to take the places where you could most help people and plant the biggest seeds of doubt. You have a gift for saying things in a way that really reaches people. The enemy will do everything he can to convince you no one is listening, that your voice doesn't matter. You have a gift for creating beauty. He'll spend every hour telling you what a frivolous pursuit that is. My point is, he wouldn't try to make you doubt it if he couldn't see the impact it could make. And what you are talking about there, and you're like, I'm sure there's somebody, like, I feel like so many of us have had that moment. I think it's so interesting that we have both from like different sides had moments or a lifetime of like hating our own voices. I've always hated my own voice, only for people to start podcasting and for people to say like, I would read the back of boxes. Like I would listen to you read the back of boxes, or I would let you read me nursery rhymes every night, or whatever the case is. And there's a deeper level to this that I want to talk about, because you mentioned this in the book, and part of my thing with my voice, like that it also references where we come from and what we stand for. And you talked about feeling like you needed to be very careful with how you sounded because of how Black women have been portrayed. And for me, one of the things I hate about my voice is that it does this like cracking thing occasionally, which when you think of like the caricatures of Appalachia, or when like, I'm thinking of like the Andy Griffith Show or whatever, when they're portraying like this really over the top caricature, they always have that character's voice crack. And it's just this like this thing. And like, it's not something that I can ever, I mean, I don't know, maybe if I worked with some expert, I could get rid of it. But like you're saying, like, do we need to strip away these things? Do we need to strip away these things that make us sound like where we come from and what we stand for and who we represent? So talk a little bit about like that, even that deeper layer of feeling like in order to fit in to the places society has for you, to even just have to change yourself on that level.
Yes, that is a real thing. And I'm glad that you spoke to that, because, even just you and I talking, like someone else may hear this and say, oh, I also have that fear or that insecurity or that doubt. And I think that's why it's so important to talk about it, because I feel like that there are, and then I tried so hard to do this by mentioning that about my voice, is like, I feel like we have these maybe bigger, sort of more universally known insecurities, like people, you can casually say this: women and their bodies, and everyone has some, okay, yeah, there's something there, we know, okay. And it's a real issue. I am not at all discrediting that. And at the same time, there are all these other subtle things that we kind of question ourselves, or we just assume they're bad or they're wrong. And because they're smaller, we may not even realize how it's impacting us in our daily life. So I just became very interested in that, because it was during my diagnosis process with being diagnosed with autism, is that it was a several month process where we went through every aspect of my life. And it was simultaneously very exhausting and enlightening. And it showed me there are so many times where something like my voice would come up, and I would just want to brush past it. And my specialist was like, no, let's go back. Let's dig into that. I'm like, I don't want to dig into it more. And as hard as that was, that was another moment where I was like, autistic or not, I would love for everyone to have an experience like this. And like, let's look at the stuff that you don't think is that big of a deal. Like,
Yeah.
if you say it's not that big of a deal, that is our whole focus for that
Yeah.
day. Is we are going to look at all the little things, the way that you have the random hair that just shoots up, and you're just like, why does this like all that little stuff? Like, and I'm not saying that every little thing has this deep, profound story in it, but I do think that there are more deep, profound things about ourselves that we just assumed or believed that we may not realize. So, I don't know what those things are for other people intimately. I don't know. So the best I can do is when I start to observe them and notice them about myself, I'm like, well, I'll speak about them, and maybe that can prompt something for someone else.
Yeah.
And I think that's the best that we can do. So I tried to give as many examples of that as I could. For instance, I also wrote about how just some experiences postpartum after giving birth.
Yeah.
And I'm not at all the first person to talk about that, but I tried to talk about it in a way and give details. And I think that's the gift of writing, is that you have the opportunity to give those details that help unlock something for someone else.
Yeah.
And sometimes just having someone unlock that fear, that insecurity for you is a way into peace all on its own. Cause it's like, okay, I'm not the only one.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it. I think it's Esther Havens. She's a photographer who said stories change stories. And like every time someone is brave enough to share their story, it helps somebody else see theirs differently. And then they get brave enough to talk about it. And it's sort of like, did you ever watch that movie, The Never Ending Story?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just launched a writing course, and we just not too long ago filmed a module talking about the hero's journey and the never ending story, and what this has to do with like how your reader is changed when they get to come along with you on a journey. And there's a moment at the end of that movie where the childlike empress is saying, Bastian, who's the little boy who's been reading the story all along, doesn't realize that he's already a part of the never-ending story. That even as he was following your story, there were others who were with him the whole time, which is like super meta. It's like the movie audience. And then we realize there are people watching our lives and people watching their lives, and we all become connected in that way. We are all perpetually and constantly being impacted by the people we're watching, and then there are others who are watching us. So we are all a part of the never-ending story, which I love.
Oh, I love that. Now I have to go back and watch that.
Oh my gosh, just fast forward through the part with the horse. Just skip right over that part. It's horrible. Horrible. I want to talk a little bit about, you talk about like peace is a practice. It's not a moment of arrival. You say you don't have to arrive at your picture perfect life before you can know peace. And a big part of my second book that's coming out, Slow Growth Equals Strong Roots, is you don't have to, and in fact, it will not work this way, get to a picture perfect life to feel worthy. You can chase that. You can get every white kitchen island you want, every J. Crew sweater, whatever, only to realize that hole in your heart is still with you. It's still there. And when we're coming back to this idea of peace being a practice and it having sort of a cyclical effect to it, you put it in the context of breathing in and breathing out. Like the simplest first step we can come to in pursuit of peace and practicing peace is just the inhale and the exhale. And there's this beautiful part where you say it's very symbolic for taking in. It relates to life in this cycle of taking it all in, not missing any of it, absorbing all of it, but also not being afraid to let go. So I want to know, like, as you look forward, like to the rest of this year, as you look forward to like 2022, December, Morgan in December of 2022 or January 2023, what are some things this year that you don't want to miss, that you want to take it all in? And what are some things that you really, you're ready to let that go? You're ready to release it.
Yes, that's such a good question. The things that I don't want to miss is the bark on the tree outside, the random sock that my husband left out, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, he left the sock out again.
Yeah.
The wax in the candle that's slowly starting to expand, the water bottle that I love, the voicemail from my mom, that's what I want to remember. Because it's when I look back, I see that my life is all those little moments put together. My life is not defined by the moments where I was just super successful or I had some really big moment happen. Those things come and they're amazing. I'm super grateful, but they're not all the time.
Yeah.
Most of the time, it's a whole bunch of little stuff all together. It's a whole lot of little joys, little memories, little signs, reminders of people that I love, people that I'm connected to.
Yeah.
That's the story. And I'm reminded when I look at, there's a reason why most people are likely to watch a movie than to go online and look for the script and just read it. Like, you watch the movie for all those details. You may not even talk about them, but that's why there's 8,000 names on the credits when the movie's over, because there's 8,000 people who thought about every little way that collar was rolled on that person's shirt, the way that the light came in and it came across half their face and not a third of their face. All of those little things people paid attention to is what makes that story. And the same is true of our lives. None of those little things are a coincidence. So that's what I hope. I hope for the end of this year, I'm able to have even more moments like that where I'm like, wow, look at this life I lived. Look at this life I'm living. Like, amidst everything going on, there's been so much goodness, so much grace, so much peace. And I am so grateful. And when it comes to what I want to let go is like, just stop taking myself so seriously. Like, just be honest. It gets harder the more books you have come out and the opportunities. Like, I mean, over this past year, I've had things that I've painted in Target, Nordstrom Rack, TJ Maxx, like everywhere I've ever shopped. And I'm like, how does this happen? And I'm super grateful. And at the same time, like, be fully transparent. Like, sometimes it gets hard to not think about, well, how do I continue to scale this and grow this and turn this into something more? It's like, or you could just do what 6-year-old Morgan would do and say, oh my gosh, this is awesome. Let's go buy some more crayons and keep going. So that is my hope, is that I don't take life that seriously. And it's, I guess, they're very serious things, which is all the more reason to create even more room to just take a deep breath and embrace the joy of it all.
Yes, I love that. I want to read a quote from the book. This doesn't mean we can't look where the sunlight pours in. This doesn't mean we can't paint with bold colors or long for the day that we are able to watch a sunrise without power lines in the way. It just means that perhaps we can still breathe deep and make the most of where we are, even if it doesn't look exactly how we hoped or planned. We don't have to understand everything before we hold both shadow and light. We don't have to eliminate every unknown before we take action. We don't have to get rid of the darkness to see where the stars shine through. Oh, beautiful. Morgan, let them know where they can find you, this book, stuff in Target we've already heard about. Like, tell us all the things.
So thank you just so much for even reflecting my words back to me. It's so encouraging.
Well, they're beautiful, and I will be that mirror any day.
Thank you. I am Morgan Harper Nichols pretty much everywhere. MorganHarperNichols.com has links to everything: my book, my podcast, my blog, all that fun stuff. I enjoy being able to connect with people through words and art. So
love it. Love it. All right, friends, the book is Peace is a Practice, an Invitation to Breathe Deep and Find a New Rhythm for Life. It is out today everywhere books are sold. Make sure you go and grab your copy, get this beautiful, beautiful book in your hands. And while you're there, make sure you go ahead and get that pre-order in for Slow Growth Equals Strong Roots so that it's sitting on your doorstep when it releases April 5th. Here is to slow growth, strong roots, and making peace your practice. Until next time, friends, this is the Mary Marantz Show.